Hi, sophomores. It's time for some more poetry notes today. The stuff that we're going to be going through today is probably the most challenging of any kind of poetry study that there is. Instead of just reading poems, we're going to be talking about how to mark out and understand the rhythm of the poems. And the reason why this gets kind of challenging is because it's kind of like having an ear for music. It's something that takes practice, and also some people it comes kind of naturally to, and there are other people who they kind of struggle to hear the syllable sounds or the stressed sound. So it'll just take some practice, but we'll have a little bit of that tonight for homework, and we'll talk through it with some examples today. So the thing that we're talking about overall is meter. So meter is the definition is a pattern of rhythm in poetry. And you can remember that because meter means measure. I think that was one of our root words earlier this year. So we're measuring the rhythm, and that implies that there's a regular rhythm, meaning that it was kind of planned out in some way. So it's broken down into syllables, and if you remember doing syllables when you were like in third grade or something, and you do syllable, you count out with claps, or sometimes I've had students who have this weird thing where they like however many times their chin goes down, that tells them how many syllables it is. I don't know. I don't know what school teaches that, but some school does, and it's kind of weird. But anyway, however you are used to counting syllables, that's kind of the basics of what it comes down to. But then you have to look at which of those syllables are stressed and which of those syllables are unstressed. And this just is naturally how we talk. But you a lot of times haven't stopped and thought about where the stress goes. But any word that you look up in a dictionary, there's going to be some way that it's indicated which syllable of the word gets stressed. So I have examples here from a couple of different online dictionaries. This one on the left, this is from the International Phonetic Alphabet, which tells you like exactly what the sounds sound like. So you don't need to really worry about that at the moment. But you'll notice there's this little accent mark here. And a lot of times in dictionaries, especially print dictionaries, that accent mark or that apostrophe will be there in front of the syllable that gets the stress. So what that's telling us is we say poetry, poetry. So the strong emphasis goes on that first syllable, and the other two syllables are not as strong. And another version of this, they just have the po in bold to indicate that it's the stressed syllable. Compare that to if we said poetry, poetry. That's just not how we say the word. You may have heard some people make lame English teacher jokes about this before. Um, so emphasis in syllable. If you ever heard somebody say you put the wrong emphasis, or you put the emphasis on the wrong syllable, that would be somebody putting the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable, which is really a hilarious joke. I hope you enjoyed that. Okay, so the process of going through and marking out the stressed and unstressed lines in syllables in poetry is called scansion. So if you are asked to scan a line of poetry, you might hear the word scan and think that means like, oh, I'll just like skim through it really fast. Scan is a technical term that means marking out the meter. And the way that we mark the meter is with U's for unstressed syllables and accent marks for stressed syllables. So with poetry, there's 3 syllables in poetry, poetry. And so we would mark it with the slash mark for the stressed one, po, and then we would mark the other 2 syllables as unstressed, tree. Same thing. We go back to that example of syllable, syllable, as opposed to the hilarious joke version of it where you say, I put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. You can hear how it sounds different, and one is right and one is wrong. Okay, so when you're trying to figure out what the stressed syllable is, Usually there's going to be one stressed syllable per word. Now we'll get into kind of some of the issues that come along with one syllable words sometimes. But at the moment, we want to look at some of these multi-syllable words and experiment with saying the words in different ways, kind of like I just did with poetry and syllable. So, coffee every morning. So if you are thinking about how to say those, coffee every morning, or coffee every morning. I hope you can hear that the first one is correct, and that first one is coffee every morning. And review or review. You can probably hear that first one was right. Review, and I'm just going to give an unstressed. We'll talk about that later. Assignment or assignment or assignment. This one is assignment. And then again, not again. So you kind of just say it different ways, see which one sounds right. A lot of times this can be a challenging thing for people who don't speak English as their native language, because occasionally there are words that they might not have a good feel for what the stress is supposed to be. But like I said, experimentation is the way to go. So why do we care about any of this? Well, poets tend to use meter in order to create a steady rhythm of some sort in a poem. And some meters create kind of a playful or almost sing-songy rhythm. There are other meters that really just sound like a formal register of English. That's actually what iambic pentameter tends to be. That's Shakespeare's meter, if you remember that. And part of it's kind of like having that as your blank canvas. And then when there are places where the poet wants to make a word stand out a little bit more, if they have everything going along in the same meter and then there's a word that kind of breaks away from that pattern, just when a person is reading their poem out loud, it gives that word more emphasis because it ruined or it went away from the normal pattern. Now I know you're thinking, some of you anyway, why do poets really think about this? Do they really go through and mark out every little syllable when they're writing a poem? Well, probably not. What it really comes from is the kind of the training, the ability to just have a feel for the rhythm of the language without having to mark it out like with these syllables. And the other thing to keep in mind, kind of like with rhyme, is that this isn't always used effectively. Sometimes rhyme is there just because somebody felt like rhyming and not because it complements the meaning of the poem. Same thing can be the case for meter in poetry. All right, so in determining meter, now we get into the world of English people trying to do things involving mathematics. The meter of a line of poetry is measured in feet. So just think about that, wrap your head around that one. Your meter is measured in feet. And a foot of poetry is 1 unit of rhythm. It's the thing that gets repeated. And usually that involves 1 stress per unit. So there's 4 basic types of poetry feet. You do need to know these. Iambic is unstressed, stress. Trochaic is stress, unstress. Dactylic is stress, unstress, unstress. And anapestic is unstress, unstress, stress. So if you were trying to figure out the meter of a line, you wouldn't be counting just the number of syllables. You'd be counting how many of whichever kind of foot you're looking at. You'd be counting how many of those feet to figure out what the meter is. So not just I see 2 syllables here, but I see 1 iambic foot in this first one as an example. Okay, and then the last one that's kind of weird, and this one doesn't go as part of a pattern. This would be like if you just had kind of an unusual part of a line where it breaks away from the rhythm. Spondee is when you have 2 stressed syllables in a row. So you can't really have a line of poetry that's all spondee because you would kind of sound like a robot. like the whole poem would sound like this, where everything is kind of flat and at the exact same emphasis. So sponde is something that's kind of the exception to the rule and not part of a pattern. Anyhow, so meter is determined by how many feet are in a line, and you might notice some of our number roots again. If you have 1 foot, it's manometer. 2 feet is dimeter. 3 feet is trimeter. Be careful with that if you're typing that, because it will almost always autocorrect to trimester, and that's just weird when you're trying to name poetry lines. 4 is tetrameter. 5 is pentameter. You should recognize that one from Shakespeare. 6 is hexameter. 7 is heptameter. 8 is octameter. And 9 is nonameter. And that's all the ones you need to know. So at the very least, iambic and pentameter, those words should sound familiar to you from Shakespeare. And so what a line of rhythm for iambic pentameter would look like is 5 of these units. So that would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we count that, we count that, we count that, we count that, we count that. And notice that's 10 syllables, but we don't try to do like decameter or something. We go with 5 feet, pentameter, five of those iambs. Okay, so when you are asked about the meter of a line, those are the 2 words that you have to have as part of it. The first word is going to be the type of foot, so that would be iambic, trochaic, dactylic, or anapestic. And then the number of feet, so that would be manometer, dimeter, trimeter, tetrameter, pentameter, etc., etc. Okay, so this poem I just thought I would share with you because this is the origin of why I have a sloth in my classroom. This is a poem that was in an older literature book that we used to read, and quite frankly, I don't know how this is considered of high enough literary merit to make it into a literature book, but here it is. This is The Sloth by Theodore Roethke. In moving slow, he has no peer. You ask him something in his ear. He thinks about it for a year. You can probably kind of hear the sing-songy nature of the rhythm of this poem. And this poem, and this is the case for a lot of poetry, it sets a rhythm and then it pretty much sticks with it. Sets a meter and sticks with it. So we go, in moving slow, he has no peer. You ask him something in his ear. He thinks about it for a year. And we go through that the whole way through. The poet even in this stanza even marked out all of our syllables for us. I don't really know why he does that, but a most exasperating lug. But should you call his manner smug, he'll sigh and give his branch a hug. Sorry, this poem just drives me crazy, and that's why there's a sloth in my classroom. Anyhow, so if we were to go back and look at the meter that's being used, we're counting the number of feet. So we have 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet. And those are, and all of them look like this, 4 of those. So that is iambic. And number of feet 4 is tetrameter. So on your homework, the thing that's going to be really useful to have with you is a list of these 4 types of feet and what they look like, and then the numbers and what they're called for the meter, for the number of feet. Okay, so more tips for scanning a line of poetry, because as we saw, when you're trying to mark just an individual word, you can say coffee versus coffee, and it's pretty clear which one of those is the correct pronunciation. But when you're reading out a whole line, like in The Sloth, for instance, we have some of these lines that are really all 1-syllable words. And so if you're looking at any one of those words, you might kind of be, double thinking it and wait, is this supposed to be stressed or is that? So here's how it goes. If you have words that are more than one syllable in the line, that a lot of times is a good starting point for you. If you're trying to figure out like the meter of the entire line, look for words that are more than one syllable, because usually those words are only going to have one stressed syllable. So if we look back at, let's see, at the sloth, this line here in the second stanza, upside and unlike. So we had two words in there that are more than one syllable, or swaying gently. So finding those more than one syllable words, you can figure out what those are supposed to be, and then sometimes that helps you arrange the pattern around them. Also, unstressed syllables oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes fall on less important words like the, a, in, on, and, etc. And you may remember from a couple pages ago when I did review the assignment again, I put unstressed on the, because even though it's only one syllable and technically like a one syllable word, the stress would fall on that one syllable. When you say it in the context of a line, we're not automatically going to give special attention to the. It's a throwaway word. So that would get an unstressed in the context of a line. So then I have this note here, and this is always important. These rules are not absolute. When you read a line in its entirety, sometimes there's a stress that falls on one of those words that you might typically consider to be unimportant. Or sometimes it might, the way that the stress falls on a multi-syllable word, maybe it'll make there be two stresses in a four-syllable word or something like that. So it does kind of depend, but those are sort of like good basics to try to get yourself started. Next tip for scanning line of poetry, take a guess at the pattern. So if you are completely stuck, you have absolutely no idea what the pattern is supposed to be, pick one of the four. Pick iambic or trochaic or dactylic and anapastic, and read it in a really overemphasized way. So let's go back to the sloth and try that with this one. Let's see. So let's say I have no idea, and so I want to try out that second stanza with, I'm going to do dactylic like that. Let's see what that would be like. So I would do stress, unstress, unstress, stress, unstress, unstress, unstress. So already we see it would be an irregular number of dactyls, but let's see what that sounds like. And then before he says a word, you can hear how unusual that sounds. And unusual in this case is basically meaning wrong. That is not going to be the type of foot we have there. Or we could try doing trochaic. So that's actually the backwards version of what it really is. But so that sounds like, and then before he says a word. And I know that when you read anything in an exaggerated way like that, it's going to sound weird. But if we do it the way that the line, with the meter that the line actually fits, it still sounds stupid. Don't get me wrong. But it sounds more natural than the other ways. It doesn't sound like you're purposefully pronouncing things wrong. So with iambic, it would be, and then before he says a word. So it sounds unusual, but it's really just making it more sing-songy. It's not making it sound just like wrong. Okay, so that's a good tip. And usually if you can figure out the stressed and unstressed syllables on the first couple words in a line, try to keep going with that pattern and see if it'll work for the rest of the line. Because a lot of times, a poet will kind of get started and that, that'll set you in the rhythm and how you're pronouncing things. So read through it that way, see if that sounds okay. And when in doubt, this is like the number one rule to remember. When in doubt, try iambic. Try the unstressed stress. That's the most common rhythm used in English poetry written in the English language. So try that out if you're totally stuck, because a lot of times that's what it's going to be. And if that's not what it is, you should be able to hear it at least a little bit when you read it out loud in that exaggerated way. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of quick examples here. Both of these are from poems that we have looked at already. This first is the final couplet of Shakespeare from Sonnet 18 that we looked at the other day. So I'd like you right now, this just as a point of practice, I'm going to read it out loud, and I want you to try marking this out on a piece of paper in front of you, okay? So put this on pause if you need to, but I'll read it, and I want you to try to mark it. So here's what it sounds like, and I'll read kind of slowly so you can mark as we go. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So let's do that thing where we experiment. Iambic is the thing that we usually want to start with experimenting on. And as a place to start, this was a kind of a challenging couple of lines because there aren't any words that are more than one syllable. And those, like I said on the last page, those could be a good starting point. But let's try this. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So that works pretty well. Let's try anapestic just to see how that would sound. So anapestic is unstressed, unstressed, stress. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see. So it didn't even fit a full number of anapestic feet, and it sounds a little awkward anyway. Let's try trochaic in the second line. So long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So that's the one that's backwards from what really works. Now I want you to notice, and this is part of where meter kind of becomes a craft. And again, I don't know that Shakespeare sat down and marked out syllables like this, but I do think that he had a strong enough sense for the sound that this is something that is purposeful. When we go through and we do the iambic stresses, you might remember that when we went through this in class, I was pointing out this. What is this? And then I circled the page a bunch of times, and some people were unsure of what I was doing and like, what, this is a circle? I don't know. This was the poem. The whole point of that sonnet was that as long as the poem lives on, the poem will give life to this person that he's writing the poem to. So notice this, even though the line is all one syllable words, and you wouldn't necessarily look at the word this and be like, oh my gosh, that's such an important word in the line. In the context of it, it is, because this, the thing that he's talking about, is the poem. And so that being used as a pronoun there, notice that both of those times that this is used, it's given the stress. So long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Okay, the other poem we're looking at here is, oh, I didn't mention this, but I think we probably know this anyway because it's Shakespeare. But if we are counting out our number of feet and we're looking for a meter, we have 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. So that would be, we have the type of foot, iambic, and then the number of feet, 5, pentameter. Let's look at this next one. Same thing, I want you to kind of try to mark this as we go along, and then check your work, see how you do. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly. scarce heard amid the guns below. On this one, there are some multi-syllable words that we could try to use as starting points, such as Flanders, Flanders, not Flanders. So the stress is on that first syllable, Flanders. And between, and crosses, and poppies. So those give us a little bit of a sense. But then we can kind of go back and fill in. If you look at that second line, that's making us start with an iamb. So that, you know, that's one of our tips, is maybe try doing the rest of it in iambic and see if that works. In Flanders fields the poppies blow. And one other thing I'll mention is that when you have a poem that rhymes, typically that last word in the rhyme that's, or in the line that is getting the rhyme, is stressed, because the poet doesn't want the rhyme to just be unnoticed. It's going to get a stress most of the time. Okay. Between the crosses, row on row. So we've got a pretty good pattern going. And if we go back and count, 1, 2, 3, 4, we have iambic. And 4, if you look back at your list, is tetrameter. Okay. So usually when you've got something in one line, it'll probably keep going in the others. Let's experiment. Let's try doing, I don't know, anapestic on this next line. That mark our place and in the sky. You hear how that's no good? The line should be that mark our place and in the sky. And what the way I have it marked is that mark our place and in the sky. Oops, not highlighting, erasing. So that's still sticking along with that. Oops, pretty new pen. It's still sticking with that iambic rhythm. Okay, so for your homework assignment tonight, you are going to be going through and telling me the meter in a couple of lines of poetry. So make sure that you do that. And I'm going to have you do the same thing for your assignment tomorrow. I think I'll have a video that where I read some more passages aloud for you to try to mark as sort of practice. But we're nearing the end of terminology for our poetry unit. So if you haven't already watched the other videos on poetry from last week, please go through and watch those and take notes. This is one of those things where there's a lot of terminology that sort of builds up quickly for you. So please make sure to do that. And I think that's everything. Have a good rest of the day.